Okay, welcome to the seventh presentation on the fundamentals of Sri Aurobindo's philosophy in Savitri. So this talk is on the Occult Worlds. Book 2 of Savitri, The Traveler of the Worlds, is the longest of the 12 books of Savitri, over 100 pages. And it describes King Aswapati, the great yogi and Tapasyan, as he explores the entire range of occult worlds, extending from the kingdoms of subtle matter all the way up to the over-mental worlds at the borders of the supermind. Sri Aurobindo, the poet-seer, describes them in vivid detail and gives us a feel of their enchantments or tortured sufferings, for these worlds also dip deep into hell. A detailed description of these many worlds is beyond the scope of this presentation. What I intend rather is a more general view of their nature and place in Sri Aurobindo's philosophy, as well as their significance for human life and its possibilities and its destiny. I'll begin by considering a few long passages from the Life Divine and then a long passage from Savitri, breaking them into shorter segments and commenting briefly on each of them. In the Life Divine, in the chapter The Order of the Worlds, Sri Aurobindo describes the nature and range of the occult worlds and their significance for human life. He also discusses their philosophical arguments for their existence or non-existence, as well as their origin, whether it might be in human consciousness itself or in the divine. But these arguments also go beyond the scope of this presentation. I begin by accepting Sri Aurobindo's conclusions on these matters and proceed to give his own views on the wide range of existing occult worlds. After concluding that our physical universe and its evolutionary development need not be the only creation of the infinite reality, Sri Aurobindo explains, beginning on page 817. He says, "But given the fact that the infinite reality is free in the play of its consciousness, it is not bound to involve itself in the nescience of matter before it can at all manifest. It is possible for it to create just the contrary order of things, a world in which the unity of spiritual being is the matrix and first condition of any formation or action. The energy at work is a self-aware spiritual existence in movement, and all its names and forms are a self-conscious play of spiritual unity. Or it might be an order in which the spirit's innate power of conscious force or will would realize freely and directly its own possibilities in itself, and not, as here, through the restricting medium of the life force in matter. That realization would be at once the first principle of the manifestation and the object of all its free and blissful action. It might be an order, again, in which the free play of an infinite mutual self-delight in a multiplicity of beings, conscious not only of their concealed or underlying eternal unity, but of their present joy of oneness, would be the object. In such a system, the action of the principle of self-existent bliss would be the first principle and universal condition. Again, it might be a world order in which the supermind would be the dominant principle from the beginning. The nature of the manifestation would then be a multiplicity of beings finding through the free and luminous play of their divine individuality all the manifold joy of their difference in oneness. So in this passage, Sri Aurobindo explains that the divine is free to express itself in different creations, in different worlds, built on different foundations than the nescience of matter on which our world is built. He indicates that it can create worlds based on the foundations of Sat, Chit-tapas, Ananda, and Supermind, respectively, and hints that it has done so. He gives a brief indication of what those worlds would be like. Based on Sat, the foundation would be unity of spiritual being. All its forms would be a self-conscious play of spiritual unity. Based on Chit-tapas, its foundation would be its power of conscious force and will in matter, realizing freely and directly its own possibilities without the restrictions of the life force as it is in matter here. Based on Ananda, its foundation would be the free play of an infinite mutual self-delight in a multiplicity of beings conscious of their unity. And based on Supermind, its foundation would be a free and luminous play of divine individualities, enjoying their difference based on a conscious underlying oneness. And then he continues this passage by describing other possibilities of manifestation. He says, "Nor need the series stop here, for we observe that with us, mind is hampered by life and matter, and finds all the difficulty possible in dominating the resistance of these two different powers, and that life itself is similarly restricted by the mortality, the inertia, and the instability of matter. But evidently there can be a world order in which neither of these two disabilities form part of the first conditions of existence. There is a possibility of a world in which mind would be free, would be from the first, dominant, free to work upon its own substance or matter as a quite plastic material, or where matter would be quite evidently the result of the universal mind force working itself out in life. It is that, even here in reality, but here the mind force is involved from the beginning, for a long time, subconscient, and even when it has emerged, never in free possession of itself, but subject to its encasing material. While there it would be in possession of itself and master of its material, which would be much more subtle and elastic than in a predominantly physical universe. So too, life might have its own world order, where it would be sovereign, able to deploy its own more elastic and freely variable desires and tendencies, not menaced at every moment by disintegrating forces, and therefore occupied chiefly with the care of self-preservation and restricted in its play by this state of precarious tension which limits its instincts of free formation, free self-gratification, and free adventure. The separate dominance of each principle of being is an eternal possibility in the manifestation of being, given always that they are principles distinct in their dynamic power and mode of working, even though one in original substance. So in that passage, Sri Aurobindo describes the possibility of a world order in which mind is dominant and not like here, restricted in its ability to work out its aims, where the life force and a more subtle substance than gross matter would be plastic to its formations. Similarly, there may be a world order in which life is dominant, able to express itself freely, its own desires and tendencies, not hampered by the dullness, rigidity, and fragility of the gross physical form, as it is in our world of matter. Thus, Sri Aurobindo suggests that the 7 basic principles of being, existence, conscious force, bliss, supermind, mind, life, and matter, each have a world or worlds based upon them, with each principle dominant in its own world order. In the next passage, which I break into several parts, Sri Aurobindo explains the significance and influence of the other planes of existence upon our world. This begins on page 821. These planes or systems are then at least coeval and coexistent with that which presents itself to us as the physical universe. We have been led to conclude that the development of life, mind, and spirit in the physical being presupposes their existence. For these powers are developed here by 2 cooperating forces, an upward tending force from below, an upward drawing and downward pressing force from above. For there is the necessity in the inconscient of bringing out what is latent within it. And there is the pressure of the superior principles in the higher planes, which not only aids the general necessity to realize itself, but may very largely determine the special ways in which it is eventually realized. It is this upward drawing action and this pressure, this insistence from above, which explains the constant influence of the spiritual, mental, and vital worlds upon the physical plane. Here, Sri Aurobindo clarifies that these other worlds exist and are necessary to explain the development of life and mind and spiritual consciousness out of matter in our world. He says that this development occurs due to 2 cooperating forces, an upward tending force from below in matter that strives to release what is involved and hidden as if in a seed within matter itself, and a downward pressing force from above, from these other worlds, that strives to manifest its powers here in our material world. And he says this downward pressing force explains the constant influence of the higher principles upon our physical plane of existence. He continues, it is evident that, given a complex universe and 7 principles interwoven in every part of its system, and naturally therefore drawn to act upon and respond to each other wherever they can at all get at one another, such an action, such a constant pressure and influence is an inevitable consequence, must be inherent in the very nature of the manifested universe. A secret, continuous action of the higher powers and principles from their own planes upon terrestrial being and nature through the subliminal self, which is itself a projection from these planes into the world born of the inconscience, must have an effect and a significance. Its first effect has been the liberation of life and mind out of matter. Its last effect has been to assist the emergence of a spiritual consciousness, a spiritual will, and a spiritual sense of existence in the terrestrial being, so that he is no longer solely preoccupied with his outermost life, or with that and mental pursuits and interests, but has learned to look within, to discover his inner being, his spiritual self, to aspire to overpass Earth and her limitations. So here, Sri Aurobindo clarifies and draws out more elaborately the implications of what he's been saying earlier. He says that these 7 principles are interwoven in every part of the system of manifestation, and that they continually act upon one another. These worlds are continually active in our world. Then he explains how they act upon us through our subliminal self, which he says is itself a projection from those planes into our world of matter. So what is this subliminal self? It is our inner consciousness, of which we are not normally aware. Modern psychology speaks of it as our subconscious. But Sri Aurobindo uses the term subliminal because subconscious implies that it is a lower, less aware, less organized type of consciousness than our normal consciousness. But Sri Aurobindo asserts that it is actually more aware and just differently organized than our outer consciousness. Though we in our external consciousness are normally not aware of it, unless we strive to look within and explore our own inner being. Through our inner subliminal self, we are unknowingly influenced and moved to create and express the vital, mental, and higher spiritual forces of these higher planes or dimensions of existence here in our world. The influences of these higher planes of life and mind in particular have assisted in the emergence and evolution of these principles in physical matter. And now the forces of the higher spiritual consciousness are pressing on us to express them and to begin to aspire and look deep within ourselves and manifest its higher spiritual possibilities in our lives and in our world. He continues, as he grows more and more inward, his boundaries, mental, vital, spiritual, begin to broaden. The bonds that held life, mind, soul to their first limitations loosen or snap. And man, the mental being, begins to have a glimpse of a larger kingdom of self and world closed to the first earth life. No doubt, so long as he lives mainly on his surface, he can only build a sort of superstructure, ideal and imaginative and ideative, upon the ground of his normal, narrow existence. But if he makes the inward movement, which his own highest vision has held up before him as his greatest spiritual necessity, then he will find there, in his inner being, a larger consciousness, a larger life. An action from within and an action from above can overcome the predominance of the material formula, diminish, and finally put an end to the power of the inconscience, reverse the order of the consciousness, substitute the spirit for matter as his conscious foundation of being, and liberate its highest powers to their complete and characteristic expression in the life of the soul embodied in nature. So here Sri Aurobindo asserts that if we enter within into this subliminal consciousness, we can bring out the full possibilities of these higher planes of existence here upon earth and in our lives. Presently, we're tied down to the physical consciousness, and our life and mind are severely limited by this outward-facing consciousness that is predominantly concerned with our physical existence. The influences we receive from the subliminal consciousness are diminished by this outward-looking tendency. At best, we can build a kind of mental, idealistic superstructure upon this predominantly physical consciousness. But if we plunge deep within into our inner being, we can find there a much wider, freer, more powerful consciousness that can unloosen the knots that tie us to the physical. And just as in their own planes, the higher principles are dominant over matter, then here too they can overcome our physical limitations and transform our life and world. And this is indeed the intention of the evolution on earth, and this is the conscious aim of the integral yoga. So I turn now to see how these other planes of existence, which are accessible to our inner subliminal consciousness, are described in Savitri. As I mentioned earlier, the whole of Book 2 describes the inner worlds, but the first canto of this book gives an overall vision of them and describes their nature and relevance to our human world. And it is from this canto that I have selected a crucial passage that extends to nearly 4 pages. And I'll break it into shorter segments and comment briefly on each. It begins at the top of page 98. It begins, "There, walled apart by its own innerness, in a mystical barrage of dynamic light, he saw a lone, immense, high-curved world pile, erect like a mountain chariot of the gods, motionless under an inscrutable sky. As if from matter's plinth and viewless base, to a top as viewless, a carved sea of worlds, climbing with foam-maned waves to the supreme, ascended towards breadth immeasurable. It hoped to soar into the ineffable's reign. 100 levels raised it to the unknown. So it towered up to heights intangible and disappeared in the hushed, conscious vast, as climbs a storied temple tower to heaven, built by the aspiring soul of man to live near to his dream of the invisible. Infinity calls to it as it dreams and climbs. Its spire touches the apex of the world, mounting into great voiceless stillnesses. It marries the earth to screened eternities. This first segment gives us Aswapati's vision of the whole series of worlds, which appear as if piled one on top of another. And this hierarchy of worlds extends from matter at its base up to intangible heights that disappeared in the hushed, conscious vast. Sri Aurobindo compares it to a towering temple, which we often see in South India which rises in distinct levels towards the heavens. Indeed, these temples may consciously or subconsciously depict or represent this hierarchy of worlds, with the various gods high up on the temple looking down onto the earth and supporting its life and aspiration towards heaven. The next part of the passage discusses the important significance of these worlds for mankind. Amid the many systems of the One, made by an interpreting creative joy, alone it points us to our journey back, out of our long self-loss in nature's deeps. Planted on earth, it holds in it all realms. It is a brief compendium of the vast. This was the single stair to being's goal. A summary of the stages of the Spirit. Its copy of the cosmic hierarchies, refashioned in our secret air of self, a subtle pattern of the universe. It is within, below, without, above. Acting upon this visible nature scheme, it wakens our earth matter's heavy doze to think and feel and to react to joy. It models in us our diviner parts, lifts mortal mind into a greater air, makes yearn this life of flesh to intangible aims, links the body's death with immortality's call. Out of the swoon of the inconscience, it labors towards a superconscient light. The first 6-line sentence and the second 1-line sentence assign a premier importance to this hierarchy of worlds. Sri Aurobindo says that among all the many systems created by the One Divine, this system alone points mankind in the direction its journey must take out of our fallen ignorance back to the One Divine. That it alone points us back is emphasized again in the second sentence when he says, this was the single stair to being's goal. It suggests our souls must ascend this hierarchy of existence to reach our intended goal. There are perhaps other systems of the One, and I'm thinking here of those forms of spirituality which leap over all of these worlds, these many stages of consciousness, directly into the oneness of the Spirit. The implication here is that these do not lead us to the goal. The goal is not self-annihilation in the oneness of Spirit. The goal is a fulfillment of the manifestation in which matter is consciously united with Spirit. This hierarchy of worlds is the bridge that unites matter and spirit. Thus, it's the single stair. The next 2 sentences are also interesting. The first consisting of 4 lines, and the second, again, a 1-line sentence that restates and re-emphasizes in the first in different terms. In the first, Sri Aurobindo says that this ascending of worlds is a summary of the stages of the Spirit, which it has refashioned in our secret air of self. In other words, there is a copy of this hierarchy of worlds within each one of us. The worlds exist independently of us in the sense that they do not depend for their existence on us, but still we have within us a copy of these worlds which correspond to the stages of consciousness that we must evolve and realize. This idea that the worlds exist objectively outside of us as well as within us is restated succinctly in the following one-line sentence. It is within, below, without, above. I've described how they are both within and without, but there is also a common saying we know, as above, so below, implying that what exists above in heaven or God must also be made a reality below in us and on earth. In the same way, the higher levels of spirit must be realized in our climb up being stair. Or to put it a different way, it suggests that the whole of the divine exists within us and in each of its aspects, in the same way that a tiny seed or seedling contains the map of the entire structure of the tree that it will eventually become. The last long 9-line sentence turns from an objective description of the worlds to their dynamic action upon us. Sri Aurobindo says that this hierarchy of worlds acts upon this visible nature we see in ourselves and in our world. It awakens us from life's beginnings in inconscient matter to think and feel and to react to joy, and models in us our diviner parts. The verb models here is interesting because these worlds precisely contain models, living beings who wear the various aspects of nature that we embody here or will embody in our future evolution. It also links body's death with immortality's call. And here it might be noted that after death, our souls go into these subtle worlds for a period of time and then return to earth to resume its evolutionary work of consciously uniting matter and spirit. The passage continues. If earth were all, and this were not in her, thought could not be, nor life delight's response. Only material forms could then be her guests, driven by an inanimate world force. Earth, by this golden superfluity, bore thinking man, and more than man shall bear. This higher scheme of being is our cause and holds the key to our ascending fate. It calls out of our dense mortality the conscious spirit nursed in matter's house. The living symbol of these conscious planes, its influences and godheads of the unseen, its unthought logic of reality's acts, arisen from the unspoken truth in things, have fixed our inner life's slow-scaled degrees. Its steps are paces of the soul's return from the deep adventure of material birth, a ladder of delivering ascent, and rungs that nature climbs to deity. So here Sri Aurobindo elaborates on the crucial importance of these worlds to our material world and its evolution. He says that if there were not this ascending series of worlds, our physical world could never have evolved beyond its material base, beyond material forms and energies. It's due to the existence of the worlds of life and mind that these principles were able to evolve here. We can say that it was due to the influence of these higher principles and the beings representing them in those higher worlds on our material world that here on earth living beings and mental beings were able to emerge out of matter. Without this pressure and assistance from above, without these models, inconscient energy and matter would never have given birth to life and thought. And then Sri Aurobindo makes it vividly clear that this is not the end or the summit of Earth's evolution. He says, Earth, by this golden superfluity, bore thinking man, and more than man shall bear. Golden superfluity is here significant because superfluity suggests an overflowing abundance spilling over into our world. And golden here suggests supramental, which is said to have or be represented by a gold color. It is the supramental being that Sri Aurobindo says will be the next stage in Earth's evolution beyond man. He says this ascending series of worlds, its influences and beings, have fixed our inner life's slow-scaled degrees. Its steps are paces of the soul's return from the deep adventure of material birth. Earlier, he had said that this hierarchy of worlds is the single stair to being's goal, and that 100 levels raised it to the unknown. And here he reiterates that it is a ladder of delivering ascent and rungs that nature climbs to deity. It represents the long climb of our evolving soul that takes many, many lives. The passage continues. Once in the vigil of a deathless gaze, these grades had marked her giant downward plunge, the wide and prone leap of a Godhead's fall. Our life is a holocaust of the Supreme. The great world mother, by her sacrifice, has made her soul the body of our state. Accepting sorrow and unconsciousness, divinity's lapse from its own splendors wove the many-patterned ground of all we are. An idol of self is our mortality. Our earth is a fragment and a residue. Her power is packed with the stuff of greater worlds and steeped in their color lusters, dimmed by her drowse. An atavism of higher births is hers. Her sleep is stirred by their buried memories, recalling the lost spheres from which they fell. Unsatisfied forces in her bosom move. They are partners of her greater growing fate and her return to immortality. They consent to share her doom of birth and death. They kindle partial gleams of the all and drive her blind, laborious spirit to compose a meager image of the mighty whole. Sri Aurobindo explains that this series of worlds was created in a descent, a fall, a holocaust of the Supreme, of the Divine Mother, As he puts it, divinity's lapse from its splendors wove the many-patterned ground of all we are. He says it has come as a result of her sacrifice, that she has consented to forgo her oneness and divinity and become this many-patterned ground, this doom of birth and death. He says our earth is a fragment and residue of this Holocaust, but it is also packed with the stuff of greater worlds. He says an atavism of higher birth is hers. An atavism is generally a trait or physical appearance of a remote ancestor that reemerges in someone. Here it refers to characteristics of the higher worlds that emerge here in our physical world. For example, characteristics of sublime beauty, great strength and courage, genius, exceptional goodness and kindness and generosity. Our world holds within it the possibilities of the higher worlds, even of the Divine Mother herself. It can recover its oneness with the higher worlds and with her. Earlier, Sri Aurobindo had said that the series of worlds is both outside us and within. Within, all its possibilities wait for manifestation. As he puts it, unsatisfied forces in her bosom move. They are partners of her greater growing fate and her return to immortality. These higher possibilities strive for expression here, but as yet the dense materiality and ignorance of our world hamper this expression. Only partial gleams of the all are shown, only a meager image of the mighty whole. The passage continues. The calm and luminous intimacy within approves her work and guides the unseen power. His vast design accepts a puny start. An attempt, a drawing half done, is the world's life. Its lines doubt their concealed significance. Its curves join not their high intended close. Yet some first image of greatness trembles there. And when the ambiguous, crowded parts have met, the many-toned unity to which they moved, the artist's joy shall laugh at reason's rules. The divine intention suddenly shall be seen. The end vindicate intuition's sure technique. A graph shall be of many meeting worlds, a cube and union crystal of the gods. A mind shall think behind nature's mindless mask. A conscious vast fill the old dumb brute space. This faint and fluid sketch of soul called man shall stand out on the background of long time, a glowing epitome of eternity, a little point, reveal the infinitudes. In this part of the passage, Sri Aurobindo explains that our material world, despite its limitations, despite its inconscience and ignorance, has a great destiny before it. It is a work in progress, But it is a work that is being guided by a calm and luminous intimacy within. He says that already some first image of greatness trembles there. Already we can see amazing beauty, displays of splendor and majestic greatness, extensive and minute and precise knowledge of the workings of nature, miraculous inventions. Of course, we also see much squalor, pain, and suffering. This world is composed of many crowded parts, and when they have all joined into the many-toned unity to which they moved, the artist's joy shall laugh at reason's rules. The divine intention suddenly shall be seen, the end vindicate intuition's sure technique. He says, the world shall be a graph of many meeting worlds, a cube and union crystal of the gods. All the worlds in the great hierarchy of worlds extending up to the supreme meet here in our still evolving world. With our rigid logic, we tend to miss the significance of this unfinished world because the divine artist is using intuition's sure technique. As yet, we are a faint and fluid sketch of soul. But when finished, we shall be a glowing epitome of eternity and reveal the infinitudes. In the concluding part of the passage, Sri Aurobindo summarizes the process of evolution on earth. A mysteries process is the universe. At first was laid a strange, anomalous base, a void, a cipher of some secret whole, where zero held infinity in its sum, and all and nothing were a single term, an eternal negative, a matrix naught. Into its forms the child is ever born, who lives forever in the vasts of God. A slow reversal's movement then took place. A gas belched out from some invisible fire. Of its dense rings were formed these million stars. Upon earth's newborn soil, God's tread was heard. Across the thick smoke of earth's ignorance, a mind began to see and look at forms, and groped for knowledge in the nescient night, caught in a blind stone grip. Force worked its plan and made in sleep this huge mechanical world, that matter might grow conscious of its soul. And like a busy midwife, the life power deliver the zero carrier of the all. Because eternal eyes turned on earth's gulfs, the lucent clarity of a pure regard, and saw a shadow of the unknowable mirrored in the inconscious, boundless sleep, creation's search for self began its stir. A spirit dreamed in the crude cosmic whirl. Mind flowed unknowing in the sap of life, and matter's breasts suckled the divine idea. A miracle of the absolute was born. Infinity put on a finite soul. All ocean lived within a wandering drop. A time-made body housed the illimitable. To live this mystery out, our souls came here. Sri Aurobindo describes the beginning of our physical universe, but preludes his description with a one-line summary. A mysteries process is the universe. His view of evolution is not the materialistic scientific one, though it has some similarities. He says, at first was laid a strange anomalous base, a void, a cipher of some secret whole. So he indicates a base was laid, which suggests something or someone laid the base. Earlier, he had suggested it was laid by the great world mother in her sacrifice, by which she made her soul the body of our state. This part of the process is certainly mysterious and differs from the scientific view of evolution. The base itself bears remarkable similarity to the scientific view of the primordial state of the universe, perhaps the original black hole from which the Big Bang erupted, where zero held infinity in its sum, and all and nothing were a single term, an eternal negative, a matrix naught. But then another mystery is brought in. Into its forms the child is ever born, who lives forever in the vasts of God. The child in Sri Aurobindo's symbology usually refers to the soul or the growing soul personality, the psychic being. Into material forms, the soul is ever born, and at the same time, this soul lives forever in the vasts of God. And then comes a somewhat enigmatic line. A slow reversals movement then took place. This seems to suggest that the process of evolution is a reversal of a preceding movement of involution, which Sri Aurobindo had described earlier as the Holocaust of the Supreme and the sacrifice of the Great World Mother. And then Sri Aurobindo reverts again to a description of something resembling the Big Bang, a gas belched out from some invisible fire. Of its dense rings were formed these million stars. And then reverting again to spiritual terms, he says, upon earth's newborn soil, God's tread was heard. This suggests to me the soul, but it could also mean the incarnate Godhead, the avatar. And then there's an 8-line sentence describing a gradual process of evolution of mind, developing in this rigid, hard physical form. And then another spiritual influx. Because eternal eyes turned on earth's gulfs, the lucent clarity of a pure regard, and saw a shadow of the unknowable mirrored in the inconscious boundless sleep. creation's search for self began its stir. So we have seen that the evolution is due to these two processes. One, an emergence of pent-up forces within matter, and the second, a pressure from above, from the planes above the physical universe. So here he's referring to this descending pressure from above. Eternal eyes turned on earth's gulfs, the lucent clarity of a pure regard. And these eyes saw in the inconscious boundless sleep a shadow of the unknowable. As above, so below. As a result of this gaze, this regard, creation's search for self began its stir, for its true self. For Sri Aurobindo, this evolution is not just due to random mutations in matter, the scientific view, but a search for self. Who am I? Asks the sage and the child. The next sentence is also mysterious. A spirit dreamed in the crude cosmic whirl. Mind flowed unknowing in the sap of life, and matter's breast suckled the divine idea. Here we see a meeting of the worlds, of the different levels of consciousness in the evolving physical universe. Spirit dreams in the crude cosmic whirl of material energy, and mind flows in the sap of life, and matter's breasts suckle the divine idea, which suggests it is nurturing the supermind, the evolving supramental being. And then another sentence, looking at the process of evolution and creation from the higher end, he says, a miracle of the absolute was born. Infinity put on a finite soul. All ocean lived within a wandering drop. A time-made body housed the illimitable. The absolute, the infinite, the illimitable was born here in the physical universe in a time-made body. The final one-line sentence, recalling the one-line sentence at the start of this part of the passage, which said, a mystery's process is the universe, concludes, to live this mystery out, our souls came here. It not only suggests the great significance and magic of this mysterious universe and creation, but also affirms that our souls have come here voluntarily to experience this great adventure. So thank you.